Less than 24 hours had passed. Brian Hooker had barely walked out of the police station in the Bahamas, and he was already giving interviews. He swore in front of the cameras that he would never hurt his wife. According to him, Lynette is his whole life, and he has no plans to stop searching for her. Am I going to keep looking for her? Well, somebody with a whole lot more authority is going to have to come tell me to stop. What he left out of all those interviews was what he said on the boat, not on April 4, but long before any of this. Words spoken to Lynette aboard the Soulmate that her mother has now made public. This video is about exactly those statements. Before going any deeper, it's important to make clear that Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He is currently a free man. His attorney formally stated that he categorically denies any suspicion against him. Even so, as far as the justice system is concerned, he remains under scrutiny. The case is still open. Nothing in this account is a verdict. Everything presented here comes from witness testimony and official sources. There is a very particular lifestyle that some couples decide to commit to, and they don't do it quietly, they do it loudly. These are financial and logistical decisions you don't walk back quickly. You forget about fixed addresses and car payments. You leave behind property taxes and all the furniture you accumulate after spending decades anchored in one place. You shrink your entire existence down to what fits without packing it too tight into 46 feet of fiberglass wood and winches. The weather becomes your second language. You have to learn to read it. And you prepare to live for weeks at a time on your own provisions. You spend more time with your spouse in a tiny space with no distractions and fewer escape routes than any normal marriage has. That was the path Brian and Lynette chose. They found their boat in Rockport, Texas, and put months of work into it. They named it the Soulmate. In March of 2023, they cast off from Key West and headed out into the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Lynette was telling her followers all about it. Standing on the bow with a huge smile, she shouted, "We're finally leaving Key West." That was just 4 months ago. In the video, you can see Brian behind her working the sails, taking the yacht out to open water. On that overcast departure day, the Sailing Hookers was born. That's what they called their social media accounts. What they recorded over the next 3 years was something genuinely beautiful. Postcards from the Caribbean, meals cooked in a solar oven, and passing storms they faced down with laughter. Lynette diving after manatees or filming sea turtles gliding under the surface. It all looked like something out of a dream. That endless horizon always waiting for them when they pulled up the anchor. And Lynette Hooker was no rookie when it came to the sea. She didn't throw herself into this adventure just to please her husband. Her mother, Darlene Hamlett, explained it very clearly. They grew up around lakes and boats. Lynette had been swimming and sailing since she was very small. The water was always her element. That was where she felt most herself. That's why people who followed her videos felt there was something real about her story. A couple married for more than 20 years, far from the everyday world, pointing their cameras out at a glittering vastness, sharing their happiness with those of us still on dry land. Their life seemed to be the answer to what we're all looking for. It looked like they had actually figured it out. Her last post went up on the 9th of March 2026. In the footage, Lynette was paddling her board in the Bahamas, pointing out marine life. The very last thing she uploaded was a photograph. It showed boats anchored in the still waters of the Bahamas. The caption read, "We're not moving from here, sorry." She meant they were happy where they were. But just a few days after posting that, she vanished from those very waters. But there is something the cameras never captured. At the end of the day, the lens only catches what you pointed at. When a couple documents their life on the open sea, they're showing you exactly what they want you to see. Nothing more, nothing less. The reverse shot is missing. That version of the boat and the marriage that only existed when the cameras were off and the audience had gone home. And that is exactly what Lynette's daughter has been telling every news outlet that's been willing to listen to her. It lines up with what Lynette herself confided to a friend in text messages that have now been made public. It's the same thing Lynette's mother, 76 years old, has stated, with a firmness she clearly isn't going to walk back. Someone who knew that intimacy knows exactly what was going on inside. She is talking, but Brian Hooker has stayed silent. You've probably already heard the version Brian gave to authorities in the Bahamas. But as always, the details are key, and it's worth going through them carefully. On the night of the 4th of April 2026, the Hookers set out. They left Hopetown for Elbow Cay in a small dinghy, just over 6 feet long, a journey of about 2.5 miles. Their sailboat, the Soulmate, was at anchor. Brian told police the weather suddenly turned with strong winds and rough seas. 3 days later, Brian called his friends Marnie and Blaine Stevenson. What he didn't know was that the conversation was being recorded. To describe how Lynette ended up in the water, he used a single word: she bounced. He said she just bounced right out of the boat. That she bounced out in the middle of gusts of around 20-something knots that, according to him, came up out of nowhere. He told police she was wearing the kill switch lanyard on the motor, that cord designed to shut everything off if the operator goes overboard. The instant Lynette hit the water, the lanyard came off with her, and the engine cut out cold. I don't know what she was trying to say, but I'd swear I saw her a couple of times in the swells. The moment she went in, I threw her one of those flotation cushions we used as a seat in the dinghy. He maintained he tried to save her by tossing her something to float on. 3 days later, he repeated this version in a voice message to Carly, Lynette's daughter. His voice sounded cold, almost clinical, as he explained that the rescuers had found the cushion and that this would help narrow down the search. He signed off with, "I love you. Talk to you later. Bye. Bye." According to his statement, he watched his wife swimming toward shore until the current carried her off and he lost sight of her. With the engine dead, Brian claims he rowed as best he could toward land. He was adrift. He says he fired off 2 flares, but no boat in the area stopped to help him. He turned up at the boatyard in Marsh Harbor around 4 in the morning. About 8.5 hours had passed since, according to him, she vanished into the sea. The night watchman, a man named Edward Smith, was the first person Brian spoke to that night. Smith told the press the man looked exhausted and asked for water. When the watchman asked about the wife, the answer was blunt: "She's in the water." At first, the watchman didn't notice anything strange in his demeanor or in his words. The nearly 9-hour gap between Lynette's fall and the first report is the dark center of this entire investigation. Brian's explanation boils down to oars drifting and a couple of flares that nobody saw. He finally made it to land. It's true that some locals and authorities mentioned the seas were rough that night. But the math doesn't add up. A man in an 8-foot dinghy taking 8 hours to cover 2.5 miles while his wife is drowning. That's the kind of inconsistency a detective simply cannot ignore without asking some uncomfortable questions. A sailing friend of the couple told the media that the dinghy didn't have the power needed to handle those kinds of weather conditions. Blaine Stevenson was clear with reporters that boat was not built for the storm that hit. These opinions carry weight in the investigator's assessment. 4 days after the incident on April 8, the case took a turn. Bahamian police took Brian into custody for a much more thorough interrogation. According to Commissioner Dames, they had sufficient grounds to act. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened. While they were searching the Soulmate in a downpour, Brian, in handcuffs, lost his footing on the wet deck. He went overboard. His life vest inflated, and they pulled him out quickly, though he ended up with a banged-up knee. His attorney later insisted the seas were rough and that any maneuvering was extremely dangerous. A search warrant was issued to seize everything: recorders, tablets, and any electronic device on the boat. CBS got access to the search warrant document. The wording was unsettling. They were looking for evidence of a missing person in the context of possible intentional bodily harm. They were not looking at this as a simple accident. The legal framework was one of potential intentional harm. They took the devices. They are now in the hands of forensic experts. They questioned Brian for more than 4 hours. A judge extended his detention by another 72 hours, a deadline that ran out on April 14 at 7:20 in the evening. In the end, prosecutors recommended releasing him while the investigation continued. Brian walked out. He remains under suspicion. Both the local police and the U.S. Coast Guard have their own active criminal investigations. Carly Ellsworth is Lynette's daughter from a previous relationship. Brian is her stepfather. At 28, she has been demanding answers from day one of the disappearance. She has spoken with CNN, Fox News, and other local Michigan outlets trying to keep the case alive. The picture she paints of the marriage looks nothing like what they showed on social media. Her doubt is simple but devastating. She put it straight to the cameras. Why didn't he drop anchor and look for her? Why didn't he jump in to rescue her if he was a Marine? Why row in the opposite direction? If my partner falls in the water, I lose my mind and I go after him. I wouldn't say goodbye. I'd be out there with him no matter what. At least we'd be together alive. The thing is, Brian Hooker has elite military training. They say he didn't jump because the engine had failed, and he couldn't get close. Still, the question about the anchor is a separate issue. The Soulmate was anchored at Elbow Cay. A 46-foot yacht in a calm harbor is a fixed point of reference. With no motor, the logical thing would have been to head back to the Soulmate. There he had lights, radio, and real communication equipment. A stable hull, and the ability to call for help. That's the priority, not rowing away from the spot where your wife is fighting for her life in the water. Brian told police the last thing he saw was Lynette swimming toward shore. According to him, brutal currents suddenly swept her away. Those two details, that she was swimming and swimming with purpose, clash head-on with one inescapable fact. Lynette Hooker basically grew up in the water. Her family, in her own mother's words, spent their lives around lakes, boats, sailboats, and always swimming. She was not the kind of person to panic when she hit the water. We're talking about a woman who'd been swimming since childhood and had spent years on the open sea. Someone who knew exactly how to handle herself on a boat. That's why determining whether the conditions that night were really lethal for her is critical. That's the big question for investigators. And there's another even more troubling one. Why would a former Marine stand by and watch an expert swimmer go under? Why didn't he jump in after her? Her daughter told NBC, "I have a hard time believing she just fell. Even if it did happen that way, I don't understand why he didn't drop anchor to look for her, or why he didn't jump in to reach her. He was a Marine after all." The facts don't fit. They just don't make sense. When NBC asked her if she thought it was an accident, she was blunt. "I feel like this was planned, if anything. This doesn't look like a simple slip-up. Premeditated is a word with a very specific weight. It is not, I have my doubts. It is not something feels off. It's the term you use when you're convinced that someone made a decision long beforehand, not in the heat of the moment." Carly grew up watching this man. She saw her mother's relationship with him up close for years, marked by several breakups. If she uses the word premeditated, it's because she's speaking from what she knows, not chasing a headline. She also told Fox News, "He already has a history of choking her and threatening to throw her overboard. And she mentioned something that hasn't been given enough weight. I saw him choke one of his own daughters once myself, and we had to go to court over it." For her, he's just repeating patterns. She also told CNN that in January of 2026, just 3 months before the disappearance, her mother confided that during a fight in 2024, Brian had threatened to throw her off the boat. So seeing this actually happen makes me think there's a lot more to this story. We're talking about a specific threat on a specific boat, told directly by Lynette to her daughter. No rumors, no generalities. 3 months before April 4. Brian Hooker's attorney denied all of this flatly. He did so categorically, saying his client also rejects any allegation of criminal conduct. In his interviews after being released, Brian insisted he would never hurt Lynette. He said, "My one job, my only job, was to take care of her. That didn't happen. I'll say it again, I never hurt her, I never would, and all I want now is to find her." He stated that Lynette is his whole life, and that the two of them belong to each other. If this case has you hooked and you haven't subscribed yet, we'd like to invite you to do so right now. Here we break down open investigations based only on verified facts, and we update the information as the case develops. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next major turn in this story. There are text messages Lynette sent to her sailing friend Marnie Stevenson in early 2024, which were shared with CBS News. This happened when Brian and Lynette had briefly separated. Steve Hansen, Carly's boyfriend, confirmed they had been apart for a couple of months. In those messages, Lynette wrote, "We were married 21 years. Our marriage lasted 6 weeks of sailing. It was really bad. I can't keep doing this out there with him." When Marnie asked if they might get back together, Lynette replied, "I guess it was just too much closeness. I'm not going back." Marnie and her husband Blaine Stevenson are the same friends Brian called 3 days after Lynette vanished. That call. He had no idea he was being recorded. They're all part of the same sailing community. Marnie kept those messages from 2024 and decided to hand them over to the press after the disappearance. That nautical world which watched the Hookers document their lives is now a key part of the evidence about what was really going on in private. It's worth pausing on what the Stevensons said early on about the night of April 4. They were among the first in the sailing circle who actually knew the Hookers well. Blaine Stevenson told NewsNation he was frustrated by how little information the Bahamian police were releasing about the search. He explained that he recorded the April 7 phone call with Brian because he needed exact coordinates for the places Brian was naming. He didn't know the geography of the Abaco Islands well, and he wanted to pass accurate information to the rescue teams. He felt that the sailing community could assess whether Brian's account matched the actual weather and conditions that night. Marnie Stevenson posted a video on her own with Blaine. In it, the two of them said they were doing everything they could to find Lynette. They weren't tossing accusations out into the air, at least not in public. They simply put the information they had on the table. Those recordings and text messages they shared became part of the evidentiary puzzle that investigators are analyzing right now. Despite all of it, after sending those messages, Lynette went back to Brian. She returned to the Soulmate. That decision, looking back today, fits a pattern that domestic violence experts have documented over and over again. The cycle of leaving and coming back wasn't random. It was the result of a deep emotional attachment combined with suffocating financial dependence. There was genuine hope for change, and sometimes a paralyzing fear of what would happen if she left for good. It is not weakness. It is one of the cruelest constants in abusive relationships. And it's exactly what fueled Darlene Hamlett's very specific fear. Darlene told reporters that Lynette kept photos of her injuries. She didn't have them for the police. She kept them as personal reminders. When he choked her, or when those bruises showed up on her back, she would just take out her camera and snap a picture. She took those photos so she wouldn't forget, especially when Brian was charming, when the sea was calm and the cameras were rolling. In those moments when nothing seemed wrong, Lynette needed something to look at to remember the face of the other version of him. Essentially, she built a private documentary archive to protect herself from her own optimism. Darlene also revealed she had been seeking advice at battered women's shelters. She wanted to know how to separate Brian from her daughter. A 76-year-old woman calling support centers to figure out how to get her adult daughter out of that marriage. She described Brian as someone with two faces, very pleasant when sober, but then cruel, full of hatred. With alcohol in the mix, he became physically dangerous. That pretty much describes him, she admitted. He would also become physically violent. She believed she understood perfectly well the conditions under which each of those versions emerged. It's the kind of understanding that only develops after years of watching in silence. It comes from desperate late-night phone calls from your daughter, and from photographs saved in the memory of a phone. Carly Ellsworth also told NBC that the relationship was volatile. There was a history of conflict, especially when drinking was involved. This lines up point by point with Darlene's account about alcohol, and with what investigators see all the time. It needs to be said clearly, alcohol is not the cause of abuse, but it is the most common trigger. It is described as the necessary condition for the most lethal side of an abusive partner to come out. The relationship Lynette Hooker spent 25 years in was not violent all the time. It was cyclical violence. There were good stretches, moments of warmth and real love, according to several accounts. But then would come something that needed to be photographed. About a month before Lynette disappeared, she bought a one-way ticket to her mother's house in Florida. She was going to leave the Bahamas. She was going to leave that boat once and for all. But she never used the ticket. 3 weeks after the date she was supposed to have left, she was in the water. Darlene herself told Ashley Banfield this. Given the lifestyle her daughter and her husband were leading, I had been bracing myself for that phone call for a long time. I felt like every return to that boat could be the last one. Did you ever tell her that? I don't think so. My husband says he did tell her. This is not a mother exaggerating out of pure instinct or drama. This is a woman who had specific documented information about what was happening on the Soulmate when nobody else was watching. Darlene Hamlett appeared on the podcast Drop Dead Serious with journalist Ashley Banfield. Banfield is a host on News Nation and has followed this case very closely since it first came to light. That conversation on the podcast was much longer and more detailed than any of her brief appearances on television. In that conversation, Darlene didn't talk about general abuse. She talked about one very specific night that took place aboard the Soulmate. The galley on the boat has a bench wrapped around the main table. Darlene described what happened on that bench, with chilling precision, the kind of detail only a daughter would tell her mother. Brian threw Lynette down onto that bench. He got on top of her. And he started strangling her. While he was choking her, Lynette felt something pop in her neck. Her neck was stiff for a long time afterward. According to her mother, Lynette stayed on the boat that night. Darlene admitted she couldn't explain why she stayed. And the next morning, the morning after she had been choked on that bench, until she felt something pop in her neck, Brian Hooker sat down across from his wife in the same galley. And there he told her what he really wished he had done the night before. I don't know how or why, but she decided to stay on that boat that night. At sunrise, the two of them packed up her things. Both of them. He even helped her carry her belongings to the dock. She came back to my house for a while. But there was a conversation that morning on the boat. He told her with absolute coldness that he wished he had finished the job and thrown her overboard. He put it just like that. He wished he had finished the job and thrown her into the sea. Take a moment and look at the structure of that sentence. Don't get stuck on the emotion. Look at the logic behind it. Finishing the job implies the task had already begun. It suggests that what happened the night before on that galley bench, that is the strangulation, that pop in her neck, was understood by the man saying those words as an action that had been left unfinished. Something that had started but had not been completed. And the specific ending he mentioned was throwing her overboard off the boat straight into the water. The exact method by which Lynette Hooker disappeared on that 4th of April, 2026, almost a year and a half after those words were spoken. Prosecutors are reviewing this. Investigators with the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the U.S. Coast Guard are on the case. They are trying to determine whether there is a connecting thread between what was said on that boat and the version Brian Hooker gave police about what happened on April 4. Stating a prior intent detailing the method and the exact location aboard the same vessel linked to the disappearance is the kind of evidence that doesn't need a body to be taken seriously by the justice system. It only needs a witness who is willing to testify to what they heard. Darlene Hamlett has done that. She stated it publicly on camera using her own name. But this threat about throwing her overboard didn't first appear the morning after the bench incident. According to what Carly Ellsworth told Fox News, the threat of being thrown into the sea was something Brian had made before. Carly mentioned that there was a history of similar threats. History, plural. A repeated pattern, not a single isolated outburst of rage. The word history carries a lot of weight here. It's the term used by someone who has heard this same story more than once. In January of 2026, just 3 months before she vanished, Lynette herself confided this to Carly. She told her that Brian had threatened to throw her off the boat during a fight back in 2024. It wasn't the first time the family had heard something like that. It was simply the most recent instance of a warning that had been around for some time. That repetition matters to investigators. An isolated threat in the middle of a fight is evaluated differently from a systematic warning over time. On the same boat, by the same person against the same victim. That history. The fact that the words were repeated that the victim told her family about them, and that they understood it as something serious and very specific, is exactly the kind of pattern prosecutors use to demonstrate prior intent when there is no immediate physical evidence of the crime. Brian Hooker spent years living aboard the Soulmate with Lynette. They had been on that boat for 4 years when she disappeared. It was their home. The galley where he choked her was where they ate every day. And the water just outside was where Brian said he wished he had already thrown her. This is not a stranger threatening someone in an unfamiliar place. It is the most intimate and terrifying geography you can imagine. 2 people locked together in 46 feet of shared space where the only way out is the ocean. And the threat in there was precisely putting her in that ocean. The fact that she ended up in that sea with him as the only witness is why those words are now at the center of 2 active criminal investigations. Those were the words spoken on the Soulmate, spoken directly to Lynette Hooker's face, spoken almost a year and a half before she went into the water from a dinghy heading back to that very boat with her husband as the only witness to what happened. The same boat the police have already searched under a warrant. The same boat whose devices are now in the hands of forensic experts. Those words about throwing her overboard were said 18 months before she finally went into the sea. Brian Hooker has not addressed this in any of the interviews he gave after his release. His attorney denies everything, of course. But Darlene Hamlett stated it under her own name on a recorded podcast. She spoke as the mother who heard the story from her own daughter. It is now part of the public record. And that is not going away. Prosecutors in both jurisdictions handling the case are very aware of this. And then there's what happened in 2015 inches, Kentwood, Michigan. Brian and Lynette were both there, but their accounts simply did not match. A complete contradiction. Brian told police she had hit him in the face repeatedly. His nose was a mess, swollen and covered in blood. A witness heard the commotion and saw Brian coming down the stairs covered in blood. Lynette, for her part, gave a different reality. He had choked her and hit her with his fist. The report was harsh on her. She was heavily intoxicated. That night it was Lynette who ended up in custody. At the time, no one documented visible injuries on Lynette's body. Not a single suspicious mark. What happened in 2015 reflects a marriage that at times exploded violently in both directions. Darlene Hamlett herself acknowledged this when she described the relationship as a roller coaster of extreme highs and lows. When things were good, they were perfect. But when the situation soured, it was hell. That 2015 report with its conflicting accounts and Lynette's arrest leaves a lot of doubt. That she was the one detained, and not Brian, shows something terrifying. Official records don't always capture the dark truth of what happens behind closed doors. That night, Lynette's testimony mentioned something specific: he had tried to strangle her. However, that wasn't the version that ended up in the final report. That incident was just the first piece in a grim chain of dominoes. By 2024, Lynette wrote to a friend. She said her marriage was a disaster and that she couldn't stand being alone with him. That same year, in the middle of a fight, Brian threatened to throw her overboard. She confided this directly to her daughter. In early 2026, she bought a one-way ticket home that she never used. 18 months before that, fateful April 4 on the Soulmate, something worse happened. Brian strangled his wife until something popped in her neck. The next day, he told her he wished he had already thrown her into the sea. And then we get to the 4th of April, 2026, the final day. Lynette went into the water from a small, inflatable boat. The only witness was her husband. Her body has still not been found. That's what the public picture looks like today. Whether this ever ends up in front of a jury, well, that depends entirely on what happens next. On what the devices recovered from the Soulmate are hiding. On whether the sea in the end decides to give back Lynette's body. It depends on whether authorities can build a solid case across both jurisdictions. In the meantime, Brian and his attorney maintain an absolute denial of the facts. There are no charges yet. To convict someone, you need much more than a simple puzzle of suspicions. But the law does not require us to ignore the fact that the pieces are right there on the table, waiting for a definitive answer. Pay close attention to the language used in the search warrant. It is revealing. To request a warrant, investigators must present concrete facts, strong reasons that justify intruding on a person's privacy. The judge who signed the warrant for the Soulmate agreed with what he saw. The evidence presented was sufficient. They suspected those devices contained key evidence about a disappearance tied to serious physical harm. That kind of language is not used to investigate a simple accident. It speaks to a criminal hypothesis. Someone deliberately did something to Lynette. True, a search warrant is not a guilty verdict. It does not prove anything yet. But it shows us the seriousness with which the case was being handled even before Brian set foot outside the cell. What's inside those devices is still a mystery. Digital recorders, top-of-the-line tablets. The phones from a boat that was their home for 4 years must hold a massive amount of private information. Location histories, messages, photos, and videos. It's all there, the digital trail of their lives. Everything they recorded or said in the days before that April 4 is now under the investigators' microscope. Whether that material will be enough to charge anyone is something only they know, and for now they aren't talking. They have not said a single word publicly about the contents of those devices. Total silence. But the warrant was carried out. The Soulmate's digital memory is being dissected by people with the power to act. Before we wrap up, there is one detail in the official record we cannot overlook. It is fundamental. Shortly after Lynette vanished, and before he was arrested, Brian Hooker turned to Facebook. He posted a message. He wrote that his heart was broken by a boating accident caused by fierce winds. According to him, his beloved Lynette went into the water near Elbow Cay. He claimed he tried desperately to rescue her, but that the current and the wind were too strong. They separated them forever. He said his only priority was finding her. He insisted over and over it was a boating accident. He talked about unpredictable seas, gusts of wind, and heroic efforts. That has been his narrative from minute one. Those are the words he chose to put on the record before the police put handcuffs on him. His official truth. It is the framework on which he has built every defense since. But investigators are not stopping at the surface of that framework. They look at what's behind it. And today, behind that image of a grieving husband, there is a search warrant and 2 ongoing criminal investigations. A set of seized devices and the chilling testimony of a 76-year-old woman stating something deeply disturbing. Her son-in-law told his own wife he wished he had finished the job by throwing her overboard. Lynette Hooker was 55. She was a mother. She grew up in the water. She spent decades close to the sea and in the end decided that her final chapter would be written right there in the middle of that blue vastness. Her March 29 post just days before she vanished came from Marsh Harbor. It's the same port Brian arrived at in a small boat in the early hours of April 5. That's where the Soulmate has remained under scrutiny, photographed, searched, and closely watched by officers, with a warrant in hand. She was posting content as if it were just any other anchorage. She wrote about the rain and how enjoyable the Sea of Abaco was. She had no idea that this setting would become the geographic backdrop of her own disappearance. Darlene Hamlett confessed on a podcast that if she could say one thing to her daughter right now, it would be, "I love you and I wish you had come home." That's all. Just an "I love you" and the wish that she had come home. Lynette bought a one-way ticket that was supposed to bring her back to her family. She never used it. That detail, perhaps more than any other in this case, is the burden Lynette's family has to live with every single day. Brian Hooker is still in the Bahamas, under a cloud of suspicion in an investigation that is still burning. The Royal Bahamas Police Force confirmed that his release was a direct recommendation from the prosecutor's office. He walked free, yes, but his freedom depends strictly on what new inquiries turn up. He has not been cleared of anything. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coast Guard's criminal investigation is moving forward on its own, completely in parallel. The devices removed from the Soulmate are now in the hands of investigators. Lynette Hooker has not been found. There are no charges yet. What is now part of the public record recorded on camera and under her own name on a podcast that's already circulating is devastating. It is Lynette's mother describing a man who told his wife he wished he had finished the job by throwing her into the sea from that boat a year and a half before she vanished into the water. Brian Hooker has not said a single word in public to deny or explain that incident. The case has not been closed, and the Soulmate is still there, anchored in that port like a silent reminder. The U.S. Coast Guard's involvement adds a dimension that doesn't get talked about enough. They opened a criminal proceeding on their own. This is not about coordinating a search or rescue. It's a criminal investigation running at the same time as the Bahamian inquiry. That means there are now two law enforcement bodies in two different jurisdictions, building separate case files. The Bahamas has primary jurisdiction simply because the incident took place in their territorial waters. However, when an American citizen disappears under suspicious circumstances in international waters near her own country, that allows the Coast Guard to investigate the possible crime. Regardless of what Bahamian prosecutors decide, the Coast Guard's process moves forward independently. Brian Hooker is not facing only one process he could simply ignore. He is facing two legal fronts. It's also worth paying attention to what Brian did say publicly after being released because it's already part of the official case file. He told CBS News he could never stop looking for Lynette. He said that someone with greater authority would have to be the one to order him to stop. He appeared visibly shaken during those interviews. On NBC, he stated, "Lynette is my life. We belong to each other." To Bobby C., he confessed, "My one job was to take care of her, and that didn't happen. And I'm going to keep taking care of her now, the best way I can," he added. He announced he would stay in the Bahamas until his visa forced him to leave, saying he would continue to cooperate with the search. That is the public face Brian Hooker has shown in the days following his release from custody. What that face actually reflects on the inside, whether it's real grief or something else, is a mystery. What we do know is that Darlene Hamlett's words are right there sitting next to his statements. The same man who swears he will never stop looking for his wife is the man who, according to his mother-in-law, on camera, once told that same woman that he wished he had already thrown her overboard. Both accounts coexist in the public record and in the hands of detectives. The question of what connects these two versions is what the criminal investigations in both nations are trying to answer. We want to know what you think. Write it in the comments. Do you believe Brian Hooker and the version he gave police, or do the events leading up to April 4 make you see that night differently? Those words on the boat said a year and a half before her disappearance. Do they change your perspective on him? With him, still a suspect, facing two investigations. Where do you think this mystery is heading? Also, if you've been following this story from day one, what's the detail that bothers you most? Leave your answer below. We read every comment and we use your questions to dig deeper into our coverage of cases like this one. If this video gave you a complete picture of the situation, these are the verified facts of the Lynette Hooker case. Follow us. This material has been built strictly on the official record. There is no speculation dressed up as fact and no rushed judgment here. We only present what official sources have stated on the record. Nothing more. Turn on alerts so you'll be there the moment this mystery starts to unravel. Lynette Hooker's family deserves to have this investigation remain under public scrutiny. Your support keeps the case from being ignored. Our prayers are with you and your family during this time. We are asking for a relentless investigation to uncover whatever actually happened in the solitude of the Abaco Islands. Darlene, thank you for sharing this with me. If there is anything we can do to help you, please let us know. You can count on it.